So I wanted to show off my map editor that I made for Prelude to a Dream. It's able to do all of the content, edit all the monsters, battle animations, everything. And it's going to make things so much easier and more streamlined for creating all of the rest of the maps and enemies and everything else that I've still got left to do for this game. And so I thought I'd show you what I've got. Over here I've got all of my maps organized in a nice little tree view so that you can see, there's my first town. The home is part of that first town, so it's a child of it. You go into the inn, it's got multiple floors. Then there's the cavern, which is part of the inn, and it's multiple floors. And over here, I can select my events, and it highlights all of the events that are on there. I can double click an event to view all of the information on that event and edit it. Adding events to this is just a simple double click anywhere along here. I can press space to edit an event, or I can double click to insert a new event, and all I have to do is just select the event I want to edit. Like, let's say I just wanted to show a shop menu. Then all I have to do is select all of the items that are available in that shop and click OK. And it creates the event, marks what items are available in that shop, and that's it. There's nothing else I have to do for it. Whereas previously I had to actually manually type out shop event, show shop menu, type out all of the items that are available in the shop. Whereas now it's just a simple check the boxes. And there's all kinds of events that are available. And this will just make things a lot easier. With one of the best ones, though, is going to be my teleport event, which is going to be right here. My previous teleport event, I had to manually type in teleport with the map name. Oh, here, I'll show you real quick. Open up tiled. So here's the original editing in tiled. When I created a new map, I had to manually set the map size. I had to manually add all of these individual layers and set them just right. Couldn't really do a map template. But if I go here to my events, so here's this guy here. This is just teleporting to the first town. And here's the script for it. It's just a simple teleport event. Hide the screen, teleport, fade, show the screen. But you can see, to do it, it's just plain text. And I had to type in the actual path to the map to teleport to, and then the X and Y coordinates and what direction to face. The problem is, in tiled, it doesn't understand that my map is 8 by 8 tiles, but the actual grid that the player moves on is 16 by 16 tiles. So if I wanted to do this teleport event, I would have to find out these coordinates here by going to that map, figuring out where I want them to teleport to. So I want them to go right here. I want to teleport the player right here. So if I highlight the spot, I can see on the bottom left corner the coordinates 0, 24. So that's 0 tiles this way, 24 pixels down, but that's 24 8 by 8 tiles. So I got to divide both of those numbers by 2, then go back over to my other map, go back into the event, and enter those coordinates along with the direction that I want the player to face. Painful. It took some time. And likewise, if I go into a town and I wanted to edit, let's say, all of the dialogue, so like here's one of the dialogues for a future event that's coming up, and as you can see, there's just a lot going on. Part of the reason why there's all these underscores in here is because my dialogue is maximum of 24 characters, so I'd put these little comments in here just so I could see how many characters I had available when typing up all the messages. But all of this was typed up just by hand, including the individual events and all of that. Whereas now, here's my new teleport event. So if I wanted to teleport to the town right there, that's all I have to do. I just select the map, select the location, select what direction to face, and hit OK. And then it teleports right to there. So much easier than the previous setup. And then over here is all the available sprites, because my maps are not able to use all of the 256 maximum sprites available in my game. Instead, each map is limited to its own subset palette of 16 sprites. But all I have to do is double click and then I can select sprites to use. And then it's just placing those sprites along here for the events. And here's a lengthier one would be like the town hall talking to the mayor. And this one, I've got if conditions, and it's in a nice little tree view, so I can expand and collapse as necessary. And you can see, like, here's the show message, a nice little lengthy one right here. And the way I did this, the way that works, is normally my game just has buffer a message to just add a message to the buffer, or buffer a value, and then show message just by itself to say, okay, we've got a line of text ready to be displayed, start displaying the characters, and bump the text up one line. But for really long conversations like this, I don't want to have to sit here and type a buffer message, show message, buffer message, show message for every single line. So instead, I made it so my show message event, I can just type in a really lengthy dialogue. And what'll happen is it automatically breaks it up into 4 lines, because the dialogue is only 4 lines tall. So what'll happen is it'll show 4 lines, it'll automatically add a wait for button press event, and then it'll continue showing the next lines. Each line is a buffer message, show message, and then repeat, and every 4 lines adds a wait buttons event. Like this one here. That makes it a lot easier. This is a remnant of the old system where if I wanted to have a message where it actually says the player's name, I had to buffer part of the message and then buffer the value of the player's name and then buffer the rest of the message and then show it all. Well, now this part right here is actually a lot easier because it can be done with just a single show message. So here's the original message, show dialogue, and I can type it in here. And right here, that second line is where it shows the player's name. So I can insert that value, and you can see here in parentheses it shows what text gets inserted so that it can interpret that. I can add it there, and then that text will automatically get replaced with the player's name, and it'll automatically break this line up so that it'll do a buffer value, and then buffer message, and then show message. So I can do this. And that's it. So this one event right here replaces all of these events from here to here. So that'll make things a lot easier going forward, as I don't have to have all of this going on. So that's how the map editor part is going to be drastically simplifies my process for editing the tiles themselves. One cool feature is on the town, you can see all these nice little flowers I decorated it with. Each one of them takes up a particular corner of the grass. So you can see this yellow flower is always on the upper left corner of that tile. Well, when placing those, it was very difficult, but with this, all I have to do is snap to subgrid, and then I can draw that tile by just clicking anywhere on a spot, and it'll only place it in that upper left corner because that's where it's at on the tile set. So that makes things a lot easier there as well. I can do nice little decorations like that without a lot of effort. And then going into the other resource editors, I've got the ability to just browse my various resources. Like, here's all of my backdrops. Here's the sound effects. I can play individual sound effects. You can't hear it right now because the recorder isn't actually recording the sounds from my speaker, but I can sit here and listen to the individual background music. And when editing the map, I can browse, select what sound to play for that map, and when I have one selected, I can even play it and listen to it, see if that's the right one that I want. And then battle animations. Here's all of my battle animations, and this I can select the different sprites here. What this does is each battle animation has 8 sprites. Again, it has its own little palette of 8 of the available 256 sprites that it can use within that animation. And I can select which sprites I want to use. 255 is just the special value of a blank sprite. And then from there, I can place my sprites on here, add frames. Each effect is either a sprite or a play sound effect, or there's shaking the screen, flashing the interface, the battler, or the player. And I can also, when playing a sound effect, again, I can look for the sound effect I want and play it and see if that's the right one. I can also play back the whole animation really nicely. So this makes it really easy to use and makes it a lot easier to create all of my battle animations. And then over here is my items. With each item type, I can edit their names, price, description. For weapons and other equipment, I can edit their stats, all from within this interface. And all of this information here is actually saved in Flash instead of in a file that it reads. And so I've got my whole system exporting this nice little resources header file here, as well as the accompanying source file with all of the data that gets built into Flash. And all of this gets generated from the editor. Previously, I had all of this entered by hand. That was painful. You can see the remnants of it commented out here. All of this was originally entered by hand and edited manually. Now I just set the values here and compile and done. And same thing for editing the system messages. I can change the text on them. All the different skills, I can give them, they just have the name and what level they're learned. Same with the spells. I can edit the player's stats, which I don't have any need to change them at the moment. But if I did want to change them, I can edit them here. And instead of having them stored right here, they're now stored in the resources for the player's stat growth. And again, it automatically compiles them into the source code of the engine. And then the other one is editing the monsters. This was another one that was a bit tough because originally for my monsters, I had... So here is the rat enemy, the basic enemy. It's an XML file. You've got your stats for the monster, and then you've got an intro event, outro event, and turn event. All that does is when you encounter the monster, it runs this intro event, and then you battle the monster. Each time it's the monster's turn, it just runs this event to tell it what to do, which allows me to script the actual battles and make the monsters a little more complex instead of just a chance of casting a spell or a chance of doing a basic attack. I can actually do more complex things with it. But as you can see, this one's fairly simple. It just simply shows a message when you encounter it, a message when you defeat it, a message when it attacks you, and just does a basic attack with this animation. Not a very complicated monster. However, ones like the giant spider boss, this one gets a little more complicated because this system did not have if branching. Instead, it worked more like assembly level, where it's just a jump if. So it jumps to a given offset, a given label, kind of like a go-to statement. And so it was a little harder to organize it better, but you can see that initially it'll generate a random number between 0 and 100, and then it'll check and see if that number is less than or equal to 50. If so, it'll try doing the web sling, otherwise it'll skip the web sling. If it tries to do the web sling, then it'll check the status of the player. Self is false, so that means checking the player. If their speed status is not equal to level 1, which means they're not currently affected by slow, then do the web sling. Otherwise, do a basic attack. If we go into doing the web sling, it'll play the battle animation, show a message, and then have a chance of actually inflicting that status with a success or fail, and end event processing. If it doesn't do the web sling, it'll then try and do its venom attack. So if that counter is greater than 50, but less than or equal to 75, then it'll try venom. And then there's the venom attack, and then otherwise it'll do the basic attack. And you can see it gets a little bit complicated for even just a simple monster. Whereas over here, those same events are now in the same system I showed you for the map events. So that monster now is a lot simpler, even though it's still a very complex event. But it's a lot easier to navigate. Generate a random number, store it in counters 3. If counters 3 is less or equal to 50, if status player speed is not equal to 1, play battle animation, buffer the message, inflict status, end. Else if counters 3 is less or equal to 75. If status poison is not equal to 2, play battle animation, buffer message, inflict status, end. Otherwise, all of that is false, so it bites you. And then do the basic attack. And the basic attack will now try and inflict poison. If the player is not at least level 1 poison, then it'll do a check the counters 3, because basic attack will store either a 0, 1, or 2 in counters 3. And that means the basic attack either missed for a 0, it did a regular hit for a 1, or a critical hit for a 2. So then that way I can have the event respond to that. So if it does a basic hit, a regular hit, low chance of poison on a regular hit. So it gives a 192 out of 255. If it does a critical hit, automatic poison, 255 chance. So it just automatically poisons you if it does a critical hit. It's a very complicated event, even though it's actually fairly simple. But this made it so much easier to edit and navigate and mess with the event. You can notice here it stops right here on the monsters. It does not actually show all of the monsters, which you can see them here. The reason for that is because it automatically stops when it reaches the first empty monster sprite. So that way it only generates the actual monsters that I've created so far. But here's another cool part with this. With everything else, like with tiled and everything, if I changed a monster sprite, it didn't always show up right away. I figured out in tiled how to get it to auto update, but my map editor was done, my original battle sprites editor was done as a Fem2 IDE plugin for my game. So if I go and edit an animation here is my original editor. And on this one, you can see that on this frame, I'm telling it to shake the screen. But when I play it back, it doesn't shake the screen. on that same frame, it's also supposed to flash the interface and flash the player. It doesn't do that on here. I could not figure out how to make that part work for the web-based version, mostly because I just didn't spend enough time on it. The other problem I ran into here is that if I change the animation's sprite, it doesn't reflect the changes here. Even though I tried doing everything I could to do a refresh images, I couldn't get it to work. There was a few ways you could do it. You'd have to like read it as a binary blob and parse it yourself instead of just saying here's the image. But it was just too much effort. I didn't want to bother with it because I had already planned on making a full-blown editor. So that was difficult. Whereas now, if I open up AS Sprite and open up my battlers, for example, here's all my battler sprites. I'm not going to draw on this one here, because if I draw there, it'll actually create a monster for it. But one thing you can see here, so this monster, blank, doesn't show anything, and you can't see it, but I just put that monster right there. So on that spot on that region, it'll have that monster. And if I go back over here, and let's just draw some squigglies. I save that. Of course, this is the ASE format, AS Sprites format, so I have to then export it to the PNG file, and all of a sudden, there's my squiggly monster. Oh, this one's not doing it because I have regions turned off on this map. But you can see I can now place my squiggly monster. It automatically refreshed it and pulled it in. Delete that, save, re-export, and it's gone. So this will automatically track any changes to any of the graphics assets that it's using, which makes that a lot easier as well. And then in the end, once I'm all said and done, and I want to go ahead and test it out, I just go over to compile data, and I can compile the actual data itself, which compiles everything into the raw binary formats, including the ability to convert all of the music and sound effects without having to generate any external files. So originally there used to be a lot of OGG files for all of the music, and then each OGG file had an accompanying .raw file for the raw binary file, and then all of that raw data then got packed into the final file, and it just stored a lot of files on the system. Whereas now, this just compiles everything in memory, packs it all into one big chunk, and writes it to the final data file, and generates the resources. And then from there, if I want, I can tell it to build the hardware binary, which calls fem2 IDE from the command line and builds the binary for it, which takes a little bit. I didn't bother adding a button to launch the emulator because there's no point. The game does not run very well on the emulator, and there's no real point in testing it on the emulator because the simulator is just so much better. But I can also build it the simulator version, which is very helpful here because my compile data, again, it generates that resources header and source file, so I may need to rebuild the game accordingly. Part of the reason for that as well is that on the anything that references a sound effect or anything like that, for example, if I open up one of these maps, you can see here, play sound effect. It plays the actual sound effect here, shown by the file name, but on the map event itself, play sound effect, it just reads a single byte for the sound effect and feeds it to the music, which takes a sound effect ID. That ID looks up the sound effect and the actual hash value for the sound effect in a global list. Problem is, if I add new sound effects, it can change the order because it's ordered alphabetically. Originally, I just had to manually create this list and keep adding sound effects to it. Now it's all generated automatically. So every time it builds, if I add new resources like that, it could change the ID number order. So I want to make sure to rebuild the sim client every time I go to test it in case I made any of those changes. But then from there, I can just launch the simulator and test out the game. Right now, I've got the simulator outputting every single map event and its offset just so I can double check, make sure everything was compiling correctly. But as you can see, everything's working beautifully. Teleporting, all of that. For testing purposes, I've got the player's speed set really high. As you can see, it's got the battle animations and everything works. I have fully play tested the game as much as I could, testing all of the different pieces in each map, talking to every single NPC, making sure to go through as many dialogue options as I could as I've got, and everything is working beautifully. So now I'm 100% ready to go with using this editor to make the rest of the content. And again, this is just going to make everything a lot easier for editing. And you can see, like, drawing on here, I can either draw like that, but I can also place them, and you see, snapping to subgrid will automatically snap everything. I can draw circle shapes, or I can draw rectangles. Really handy. Really useful. The only thing I don't have is I don't have an undo. So I gotta be careful with what I do because I do not have the ability to undo. So, a little bit unfortunate, but not terribly difficult to work with. I just gotta fix these little pieces that I just messed up here. Yeah. Good as new. But later I'll implement an undo feature so that I can do an undo redo. I already know exactly how I can do that. I've done it before on previous editors. But there you have it. That is my editor for all of the stuff for Prelude to a Dream, and I can preview the maps, toggle the individual layers, and then once I have it, the layers that I want visible, the zoom level that I want, I can then click the button to export an image and browse the file system and just save a PNG image of exactly what I see here, which is cool for sharing maps that I create, just showing an image of it. So that's everything for the map editor and everything else involved. And so as you can see, it took a lot of work to do. There's a lot of source files involved. Some of them can be quite large, like the map event. Currently everything's collapsed, but if I unfold, you can see there's a lot of code involved for all of this. So it took me quite a while to get all of this done, but now that it's done, it's going to save me so much time and effort on making all of the content for this, and hopefully I can bring you guys Chapter 3 fairly soon because the town is already done. The inn is mostly done. The knight that you're supposed to talk to is all scripted. He's ready to go. Same with the house that you go to, they're all ready to go. Only thing left to do now is back out on the overworld, put a little swamp village. There's a little swamp tribe that's going to go right here, and I got to make the sprites for it. I got to make the tile set. I got to make the maps, and then the forest town will be done. And then down over here, there's going to be a sea town, and off over here, there's going to be a desert town, and then you're going to do all three of those, and then you get to go to the palace, and I got to do a map for that and tile sets. And once you're done at the palace, you go into the palace's dungeon, and then through a cave, and over to the ruined tower, and do stuff there, and then back over to the palace and do stuff there, and then finally you can leave and go to the exit. So there's a lot to do for Chapter 3. It's going to take a bit, but this will make it a lot easier, and hopefully I'll be able to get that done a lot sooner now.